She's Jori Epstein. I'm Jason Fitz. It's Inside Coverage. Jori, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, my fandom aside, a lot of times when we're getting ready to do this show, we're sitting there saying, what's the right thing to talk about? We do a meeting. We got all these topics ready. This week, the NFL decided that it's basically early Thanksgiving. They're going to give us a feast, and we can go through all of it. I don't remember a non-trade deadline week that felt as hectic and wild as this one in a long time.
Tuesdays have been insane lately. I feel like the Steelers are giving us something every week. The Jets are giving us something every week. We had multiple receivers who have at least 5 Pro Bowls to their names getting traded. And I mean, again, it's crazy. I know we'll talk about it, but I was at Monday Night Football this week. The Jets and the Bills were playing, and within 12 hours, they each had another Pro Bowl receiver on their roster. So this has definitely been an unhinged week in the NFL, and I feel like every Tuesday seems to be unhinged, which, as many reporters around the NFL will tell you, we kind of are like, oh, we can get away with scheduling like a dinner with family on Tuesday night or a doctor's appointment. No longer.
Yeah, there will be no life during football season. By the way, Inside Coverage, if you're listening, we're on our own platform now. You can go ahead on the own feed and you can rate, review, subscribe there. Want to get that out of the way early, make sure everybody's doing the good stuff that helps the show grow. In the meantime, and Frank Schwab gets the much warranted week off. So no Frank today. Frank will rejoin us later in the week. But Jori, let's start with that Monday night game, because I thought, and really the conversation leading into it was, if the Jets win, maybe they'll go all in. And then instead, the Jets lost, and the next morning, they went all in. So how surprised were you, given the outcome of that game, that the Jets remained as aggressive as they are?
I think it's interesting. Even though you didn't on Monday become top of the AFC East, and you didn't necessarily show that you are a serious playoff contender, I think that the Jets look at this and they say, we don't know if we have Aaron Rodgers for just this year, for this year, next year, where we are. And so we are going to pull out all the stops. We are going to fire our head coach. We are going to change play callers. We are going to get him his receiver. I thought what was interesting is that Aaron Rodgers, after the game on Monday night, was talking about how on the his final play of the game, which was an interception that essentially sealed the game, he said that one of the receivers was supposed to go up the seam, the other was supposed to be on the red line. He threw a no-look pass to the red line because that's where the guy was supposed to be, and he did not feel like Mike Williams was where he wanted to be. And I was pretty surprised, because they keep preaching accountability. They keep preaching looking in the mirror and asking themselves. And while Aaron Rodgers was holding himself accountable also, he was calling out the refs. He did call out his receiver, and he was not only holding himself accountable and not only looking in the mirror at himself. And I think once I saw the Davante Adams trade go through, I was like, oh, well, maybe Aaron realizes, Allen Lazard, not a perfect receiver, but I trust he's going to be where I want him to be because he understands from all these years. Davante Adams, we've got that history. We're going to be in sync, which we'll see if that pans out. But I do think there was this sense of, let's just give Aaron what he wants. To a degree, again, they did demote Nathaniel Hackett from play calling, so maybe not 100%, but really, like, this is the year. Whereas the Bills are closer to Super Bowl contention, I think, and trying to make that push. The Jets just realized their window is so small and getting smaller by the day.
So let me be clear here. I think the Jets have done the right thing, as pot committed as they are. And that's for anyone that doesn't play poker, there's a phrase called pot committed, where basically you put so much money in the pot that even if your hand is bad, you're done. You just got to see the hand through and hope that you get lucky. I think that's where the Jets are. They're pot committed. And, frankly, when they acquired Aaron Rodgers, and at the time I was on ESPN radio on the show there that we had every day, we were talking about the fact that the Jets were going all in on an older roster and really giving up on young development. Jets fans destroyed everybody on no, we're not. We're doing the perfect build here. We're keeping young and old and bringing it all. No, none of that's happened. So acquiring Davante makes sense, because you are this far into this thing. The only result that would be considered success for the Jets and Jets fans is a deep playoff run, like some sort of meaningful football in January. Davante helps with that. This is a third-round pick that, if we're being honest, we can stretch it and say it becomes a second, but it only becomes a second if he starts in an AFC Championship game or a Super Bowl, or if he makes the All-Pro team. All of those things seem to be a reach. So if it becomes a second, the Jets don't care. This is likely a mid to late third-round draft pick. Why not acquire Davante Adams for a mid to late third-round draft pick? I don't have a problem with anything that they've done here. I just also would argue that it doesn't suddenly make the Jets great. Like, I'm not looking at an offense thinking, you know what they really need? A number one wide receiver that can step in and change everything. This is an offense that's out of sync. And I don't know that you suddenly fix that even with the acquisition of Davante Adams. So I understand the strategy. I just don't think it will get them the result that they want.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's definitely a sense of, you can do all of this and not get where you want. And I know that we'll get to Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, but I think back to when the Cowboys traded for Amari Cooper in 2018, and they said, hey, we're going to give up a first-round pick. So not a third, but a first. And ultimately, did they win more games after that season? Yes. Did they make the playoffs? Yes. But a year later, they were still 500 and non-renewing their head coach. And so I think that's the irony here, is that so many people want these splash moves. And I think that there is a sense of urgency in the organization that is created when you make one of these moves. But if you look historically at how often they actually work and how often they actually get a team over the hump when the expectations are as high as they have been for the New York Jets, it's not that high of a hit rate.
I will address the other side of this trade quickly, because I think it's important to note that no matter what team it is, no matter what logo's on their helmet, the Raiders were stuck at this point. The minute Davante made it clear he didn't want to be a part of the organization, and the organization knew that they couldn't work that out, the value was never going to be massive in return. Is there a very real question that you have to ask as an organization about why Randy Moss, Amari Cooper, and now Davante Adams in the last X amount of years have all wanted to leave the team? Sure. But if you're looking at right now, Tom Telesco getting a third-round pick and getting them out of the remaining salary, I think that was kind of a best case scenario for the Raiders for value back on this player at this point. Does it make it a good trade? Does it make me feel good as a fan? No. Do I care about a third-round draft pick next year? No. If I'm being honest, I don't like anything. But Jori, I don't think that any GM or any team would have gotten a different level of value out of this, because the proposition was what it was by the time we got to this situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think you also have to recognize, though, like, you getting out of the salary, if I understand correctly, the Raiders are carrying a dead cap charge of $13.67 million this year, $15.7 million next year, and the Jets are only paying $3 million roughly this year. So it's not really getting out of the salary.
It's getting out of paying the cash. They wipe some of that cash out that they have to pay him this year. It doesn't change their salary cap, but it wipes some of that cash out. And
right,
the salary cap,
fair.
I mean, the other side of it is, yes, they certainly will carry some dead cap, but they have over $100 million in cap space next year now. So if you're Tom Telesco and you're building for the future, guy doesn't want to be here, you're able to get your owner out of paying some of the cash, you get a third-round pick. I don't know that there was much better that was going to happen from anybody else. Like, this is not comparable value, but comparable value was never going to be available. You know what I mean? Like, that's a part of this. As much as I want to yell about what the Raiders got in return, I don't think the best GM, I don't think Kansas City would have gotten a better return because they're Kansas City, right? A better GM, better team, better organization doesn't get a better return. They just might have been able to convince the player to stay. And if you're the Raiders, now you're in basically, you're even acknowledging more that you're in rebuild mode. Like, the rest of this year is not going to be any better. It's going to be a tougher year without Davante. So it's sort of a lose for them in that situation. Where are you on Amari Cooper being traded to the Bills at this point? Buffalo gets Cooper and a sixth. Cleveland gets a 2025 third and a 2026 seventh. So a little bit of a pick swap action like this just feels like nominal return for a player that we all know.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I remember when Brandon Cooks was traded to the Cowboys, I wrote a story because Brandon Cooks had been traded, not cut and released and re-signed, but traded from the Saints to the Patriots to the Rams to the Texans to the Cowboys. And when he played for the Cowboys, he became the first, certainly receiver, but I think player to play for 4 teams to which he was traded. And Amari Cooper is shaping up to play for the 3rd team to which he was traded. So as you know very well, he started his career with the Raiders. Then he gets traded to the Cowboys. The Cowboys traded him a couple of years ago to the Browns, and now the Browns are trading him to the Bills. And he's one of those players who is really strong, but you also need to be able to kind of justify his value and feel like you're going somewhere on that roster. And I think that the Browns no longer felt that way. And so they're like, hey, we can get a 3rd round pick out of this. We traded it's interesting. If you look at the draft capital standpoint, congrats to the Browns. They traded a 5th round pick to acquire him and now are getting a 3rd round pick a couple years later when he's 30 years old. Now, if you look at the cash standpoint, they were paying $20 million from when he came to them, and the Bills, I believe, are paying veteran minimum. And so really the Browns are still carrying the cost of that. But I think when you look at this, Deshaun Watson and Kevin Stefanski are not figuring this out. We have not seen an effective Browns offense. I think what's most notable to me is that they're trading Amari Cooper just before Nick Chubb comes back to the field. And so there doesn't seem to be a belief that, hey, when we get our running back on the field and we have multiple weapons, we are going to be able to field a competitive team necessarily. And the Bills realize, like, hey, we lost Stephon Diggs. nobody really liked. Neither team on Monday night was happy with how that game turned out. And so now we have one more weapon to see if we can, in January, when we're probably facing Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs again, have one more weapon to help us get over the hump.
Well, look, I think every team has to have an answer for what you do on 3rd and 6. And that's just real for offensive game plan. And the answer for 3rd and 6 for the Bills for years was, hey, we'll look for Stephon, right? And I think they came into this year thinking, we'll look for Dalton Kincaid. That's a perfect opportunity for a tight end that's going to take this step into sort of wide receiver / tight end. That hasn't really happened for Dalton. So now you're already asking Josh Allen to be superhuman every single drive. If Josh Allen can have a dependable veteran weapon that he can work in on 3rd and 6 that he knows can be that guy for him, this deal makes a ton of sense for Buffalo. It makes his lift easier. The only thing I'd say about Amari is something I've said before. When I was working on ESPN Radio on the morning show, somebody that coached him at the highest possible level, knew him well. I talked to him off air one day and I said, why is Amari Cooper so inconsistent? And I'll never forget that coach turned around and said, if I knew that, I'd probably still be coaching. Right? There's a level of Amari Cooper that giveth and taketh away. So what Josh Allen is going to have to figure out is what every team's tried to figure out. How do you keep him engaged? And the word behind the scenes on Amari has always been that something can be said or done during a practice and it will cause him to just check out. He's not engaged for the rest of the week, and nobody knows what that is. So Josh Allen is going to have to make sure from day one that they're creating the right infrastructure for Amari. If Amari is engaged and he's into it, he's one of the best in the league. If he's not, he drops balls and he doesn't seem to run the right routes. Like, this is just the give and take. So if you're Buffalo, you're banking you can do this. But that's also what the Cowboys banked on when they traded a first to get him. That's also what the Browns banked on when they traded for him. Like, it's just, this is the world of Amari Cooper. So if you're going to get Amari and you're Buffalo, you better understand day one that you have the infrastructure to make him feel like he's part of something that he wants to be part of. If you get engaged Amari, helps you win a Super Bowl. If you get unengaged Amari, you're going to be trading him for, a pack of lime Skittles in a year.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating. Amari Cooper, in his career, he worked with Derek Carr, he worked with Dak Prescott, then he worked with Deshaun Watson. I think seeing what Josh Allen is going to be able to do, especially out of structure, is really going to be fascinating for Amari, because Amari is actually a pretty in-structure receiver is where he thrives, I would say, because he's so precise on his routes when he is, like you said, engaged and really locked in, and he has that. And so I think it'll be interesting to see what he can do with the scramble drills, but I really do feel like Josh Allen has such a different style of play than anyone Amari has worked with on a regular basis so far. I guess you could say Deshaun Watson in Houston had some of that, but not when he was working with Amari in Cleveland. And so that's what interests me most, is understanding how the just insane style of Josh Allen, and insane in a great way, fits with the skill set of Amari Cooper.
Yeah, and I always go back to, if the Bills believe they could get through this season, and now they get a piece like Amari, it feels like to me, if I'm having to look at these two acquisitions, Amari helps the Bills in many ways to me more than Davante helps the Jets. It's not that Davante isn't huge for the Jets. It's just that I don't think the usage of Garrett Wilson has made a ton of sense in this offense. So now all of a sudden I'm putting Davante in, and I'm going to figure that everything gets fixed and they're suddenly using all their weapons the right way and they figure out their offensive line and all of these things. For the Bills, there hasn't been a usage issue. There has been we need a separator. We need one guy that can come in and be wide receiver one. I think that's Amari. So I like Amari for the Bills more than I like the impact of Davante for the Jets.
Yeah, I think you make a great point in terms of trading for a player that adds a skill set that you do not feel like you already have available to you with your personnel and with your playbooks. Because I do think that in some ways, Davante Adams, if not being repetitive to Garrett Wilson, is at least, it complicates things a little bit, because I actually thought that Aaron Rodgers and Garrett Wilson had their best game together on Monday night. Yes, statistically, but also they just seem to be in sync, particularly in that first half and particularly outside of the red zone, which you have to be better than 1 for 4 in the red zone. What's going to be important for the Jets bringing in Davante Adams is that you should view Davante Adams as your number 2 receiver, particularly with his age and his hamstring. If he comes up as a number 1 receiver at some games, great. If he takes that attention from defense, is great. But I think the Jets and Aaron Rodgers will be making a huge mistake if they start to de-emphasize Garrett Wilson's targets because Davante Adams is in the building. And if you want to say like, oh, how likely is that? Well, I already think that Aaron Rodgers has shown how many targets he's willing to give to Allen Lazard because of the trust factor. And I really like Allen. I think one, clearly this past week, both with the Hail Mary and also with that key third down, Allen was kind of in this place that how would you even know Aaron wanted you to be there other than, oh, we practice it every week for 6+ years working together. But I think that they shouldn't give up on building that connection with Garrett Wilson, because that's just really, really key to the Jets offense being able to do what it needs to do.
Let me ask you this. We'll move on, I promise. But let me ask you this. Do you feel like now that Davante Adams is a New York Jet, your view of where this team is headed this year has changed drastically?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
I think that it's the thing is, I don't feel that either the Bills or the Jets have drastically changed. I think they've changed, but not drastically. And to me, it's so easy. It's not so easy, but if you are willing to pay, it is fairly easy to get these players in the building, and then you have to onboard the players, make sure they understand the offense, make sure they understand the quarterback. I do think that Jeff Ulbrich, the interim coach, talked yesterday about how Davante is more valuable to the offense because of his relationship with Aaron. So I do think that Davante has more value to the Jets than he does to every team except for maybe the Saints, where he has Derek Carr. I think they're better, but I just question whether the general vibes around the Jets and everything going on, like, you have to sort through so much chaos to actually be able to produce. And so I need to see them do that before I actually believe in it.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. I think it makes the Jets better, but I'm not sitting here saying, oh, now the Jets are going to be the favorites in the AFC East and they're headed to the Super Bowl. No, it doesn't make me say any of that. It just makes me say a team that's 2.5 games back in their division because of the tiebreaker with the Bills right now is going to have to scratch and claw to get their way to the playoffs. All right.
I'll say, Fitz, though, like, what's kind of fascinating about this Jets team is, and I know it's an any given week kind of league, and so many games do come down to that last possession or that last bit, but this is a team that Greg Zuerlein makes a kick and they beat the Broncos. Like, they lost their last 3 games. And this past week, and I really like Greg Zuerlein as a guy, and we talked to him after the game, and I give him a lot of credit for being accountable, but he missed 2 field goals and they lost by 3. Like, this is a team that went 1-4 in the red zone. 3 straight games now they've lost by 1 possession. And so I think that they're not far from being 4-2 instead of 2-4. And obviously you have to actually win the games. And if you can't get to the playoffs, it doesn't much matter what you can do. But I do think that, like, the margin of error for this team is small, but also the margin by which they've been losing is small. So I don't think it's crazy to think that, yeah, this defense continues to settle in, which, again, think about it. Against the Bills, who I think have a very good offense even in the pre-Amari Cooper era, they let 20 points up in the first half and only 3 in the second. Now, granted, the officials probably helped everyone keep the scoring down in that second half. But I do think that this is a team that is a little more capable than their record suggests.
Well, and frankly, if we're talking about records, the AFC and the parity across the conference provides opportunity. I mean, there's not a lot of dominance when you talk about what we're seeing right now. This isn't a conference full of 4-2 teams that are all 2 games ahead. This is a conference that has, if you take division leaders out right now, there's 1 team at 4-2. Everybody else is, within a game of 500. So the fact is that the Jets are far from out of this thing. Like, they're far from out of this thing to make it a wild card particularly. And then you never know. But I don't know that Davante Adams, Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson, this defense, I don't know that a wild card team that loses in the opening round of the playoffs is exactly what the Jets had in mind, but maybe that gives them the best shot at trying to calibrate this thing and move it forward. It's just, boy, they're in right now, so you better win big.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll note for our listeners who are looking for a little bit of optimism on this beautiful Wednesday is that when the Jets were talking to us last week about their players-only meeting after Robert Saleh was fired, one of the things they noted is that oftentimes you have a players-only meeting. It's November, it's December, and quite frankly, if you're not already eliminated from the playoffs, you're very close to it and really just trying to say, hey, let's play for pride, let's play for our future contracts, like, let's make sure that we are not giving up. This is a team that is making these drastic moves. Well, they really still have pretty much everything in front of them. Do they control their destiny in the way that they would have if they had beaten the Bills on Monday night? No. But this is a team that's making these moves before it's too late and before they're even close to being too late. So I do think that's notable that while the Jets need to show us that they're capable of winning those big games before we should truly believe it, I do think that they're entering an era with a little more firepower and a little bit of a different scheme and a different set of coaches who are in charge before it is too late.
All right, speaking of new eras, maybe a new era in Pittsburgh, definitely a new era in other news in Vegas. We'll break down some of the other big news happening this week. We'll do it when we come back. All right, Jori, Justin Fields went 4-2. Everybody's got good feels about Pittsburgh, but it's now been made clear by Mike Tomlin that Russell Wilson is fully healthy, which creates the question of QB1. Like, I don't know, when you're 4-2, do you make a quarterback change here? What's going on?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating situation because Look, I think Mike Tomlin is very pro giving Russell Wilson every opportunity, maybe even to a degree that many other coaches and personnel people in the building are not. I think what's interesting is that for a long time, they were able to slow play potentially Russell Wilson coming back from his injury. I'm not saying that they did that, but they had the opportunity to if they wanted to. Because, hey, if you're winning, you're letting Justin Fields do what you want, then why rush another guy back, particularly when he has already aggravated his calf injury and he's not young relative to NFL quarterback years? But when Mike Tomlin was talking on Tuesday, last week, he said, okay, Russell is able to be a full participant for the first time this regular season. Now it's about making sure he's healthy enough to be mobile and to protect himself in the ways we need in the game. Well, this Tuesday, when Mike Tomlin talked, he said, no, now Russ has shown that he's fully healthy. Yes, he's knocking off the rust, and he was not willing to commit to Justin Fields being the starter necessarily. So again, a week ago, as Russell was working into full practice for the first time, Mike Tomlin did say that Justin Fields would continue to get the first team reps for now, and that Russell would start with the second team so as, quote, to not disrupt Justin's game preparation. And that is not the language we are hearing this week. I think what's challenging is that even Mike Tomlin acknowledges that what Justin Fields can do with his legs and the way he has his mobility is an element of the game that Russell Wilson does not have. But this is still a guy who completed, 58% of his passes, no passing touchdowns against the Raiders. And so he doesn't necessarily have the arm talent, and at least the demonstrated arm talent with this cast that Mike Tomlin is looking for. What's been fascinating to me watching Mike Tomlin's last Tuesday press conferences is that after the Cowboys played the Steelers, Mike Tomlin just kind of went off on this tangent that I wasn't expecting about how much he needed to respect Dak Prescott's game. And did you see the ball he threw on the seam on 3rd and 9 and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, huh. And then this week he gave similar praise to Aaron Rodgers. And I am not comparing Dak Prescott and Aaron Rodgers' arm talent. I recognize what the Cowboys did this past week, but I think that Mike Tomlin has been very, very adamant praising other quarterbacks' arm talent in the last couple weeks. And I think he looks at that and says, hey, when it comes down to it, when I need that throw, I believe that Aaron Rodgers against me is going to be able to make that throw. Do I believe that Justin Fields is going to make that throw? And if I don't think he is, do I think Russell Wilson is? And so there's kind of this complication of, it's not that there are two guys with a very similar skill set, one of whom is better. They offer different elements to the offense. What do you do with that? Now, I was a little bit unconvinced by the way that Mike Tomlin said, like when people were asking him about the starters and who's going to get the first team reps, he was like, we haven't decided minutia like that. And I'm like, oh, please, Mike. And then when people kept asking him questions about the quarterback, he goes, yeah, it's cute that you guys are asking all of these questions. It's only Tuesday. Props to Mike Tomlin for wanting to have the gamesmanship. Why would you tell another team which quarterback they should prepare for, particularly when they have such different skill sets? But I think that it does seem increasingly likely that Russell Wilson is going to get his opportunity to start. And then again, you have that opportunity to go back to Justin Fields if it doesn't work out, but it does seem like Mike Tomlin wants to give Russell Wilson that opportunity.
Well, look, Justin Fields' legs saved the Steelers early and often against the Raiders. There were several times that he was got. Looked like the play was over, and he got him out of it, including a nice little touchdown run, right? Like, you think about what Justin Fields' athleticism means, it's obviously significant. I keep looking at this saying, man, you're 4-2 as a starter. You're playing well enough to win games. You're obviously not a great, accurate passer. That's all very true. What's your future? If you really look at where the Steelers are, part of what they have to do is figure out how to win the games this year. They also have to figure out what the quarterback position is going to look like moving forward for them. And Justin Fields is not in a great situation contractually where all of a sudden you can look at it and say, I know what your future looks like. And it feels like part of what we thought, especially me coming in saying Arthur Smith in offense likes a quarterback that's mobile, that can roll around, that can use the tight ends, that can hit the mid-level passes. Like, that's part of Arthur Smith's game as an offensive coordinator. I thought there'd be a lot of opportunity for Justin Fields. For him to be throwing the ball as inaccurately as he is right now, he's not a threat right there. He can't take advantage of open guys. I just keep looking at it and saying, does Justin Fields really have a starting future in the NFL? I don't think so. And so there's so much on the line for a kid that's winning football games and playing well enough to win. But I'm also looking at it saying, man, if the Steelers don't want him, who does? Like, it's quarterback thirsty league. I get it. But man, it feels like even in winning, Justin Fields might be playing himself out of a future as a starter in the NFL.
Yeah, what's challenging for the Steelers is that you don't want to mess with momentum. When you have a guy who's winning games, you don't want to make a change. That said, I think Mike Tomlin believes that in the playoffs, Russell Wilson is going to give them a better opportunity when they need a different level of quarterbacking play. And so if you want to be ready for the playoffs, you want to go with Russell Wilson, assuming he has that arm talent. Again, we haven't seen him play yet this year. But if you want to go with the momentum now to get to the playoffs, you want to go with Justin Fields. So I think even within this season, there is some debate. It's interesting. I do a radio hit in Seattle every Tuesday, and they were asking me yesterday whether there's a chance that the Steelers would want to trade Russell Wilson or Justin Fields during the season before the trade deadline. I don't think so, because I think this is a team that believes, like, with Mike Tomlin, you're always going to steal a few wins every year. And so I think this is a team that thinks we have the defense. We have some talent on offense, even though their offense is definitely less settled than their defense. And they want to do everything they can and make sure they have that backed up. So I would expect that we see both Russell Wilson and Justin Fields start another game this season. Now, I hope for them that there's no injuries, and I don't know if that's going to be injury schemes, just different reasons, whether it's, oh, we already made the playoffs, we're starting the other guy to get him experience. But the way this is shaping up and Mike Tomlin's unwillingness to commit to either one of them. What's also been interesting is, again, Brooke Pryor, who covers the Steelers for ESPN, is one of my best friends, and she was tweeting yesterday, like, the Steelers never changed their official depth chart when Justin Fields went. They still had Russell Wilson listed as the quarterback one, even when he was not playing at all, even when he was emergency quarterback. And last week, when for the first time in the regular season, he was listed as the number 2 because he was healthy enough to play if they needed him. So I don't think they want to hand over the baton as quickly as they can, regardless of what it may say about their future at the quarterback position.
Ultimately, by the way, for all this conversation about what the future looks like and what they're going to do, Mike Tomlin has got this Steelers team that seems to have holes in the game, 4-2. Like, so we sit there all the time and we say Mike Tomlin never has a losing season. And I know Steelers fans get as tired of hearing that as we get of saying it, but man, there's some beauty to it. Like, if you're Tomlin, you're looking around saying, yeah, Aaron Rodgers can do this and Dak Prescott can do that. The hardest thing that the Steelers are going to have to realize at some point is their chances of landing the next Dak or the next Aaron Rodgers is going to be pretty slim, because they are always in the play. Like, I'd rather be in the playoffs than be in the hunt for the first overall quarterback, but that is reality for the Steelers. They're going to have to find some sort of an answer a different way, because I don't think they're ever going to suck enough to be able to get themselves where they need to draft the guy that can. They can't draft their Jaden Daniels. That's unlikely to happen.
Right. You know, it's a great point, because that really does matter. And I don't see the Steelers. I mean, they're a fairly conservative team as to how they run their roster construction. They're not making a whole lot of splash plays. And so I think when you look at it also, whichever quarterback starts this week, I mean, you're going against the Jets this week and then the Giants and then the bye. So let's say you give Justin Fields one more start. Well, it's going to be a lot harder to play against the Jets defense this week than the Giants defense next week. So I think that that's kind of interesting too, in terms of how it impacts the perception of these quarterbacks.
So speaking of organizations, big organizational change in Vegas. I'm not talking about the Davante Adams trade. I am talking about a minority share that has been bought by Tom Brady and a group. So I say Tom Brady and a group. At this point, a group of 3 investors have bought 10% of the Raiders, Tom Brady being one of them, his business partner being the other, and then former Raider and Patriot Richard Seymour being a very small part of that ownership group as well. But Brady is really the face of this. He acquires about 5% of the team. I have a million questions for you, Jori, but the first of these questions: how can Tom Brady do his job as a broadcaster when there are so many constraints on what he's allowed to do as an NFL owner, not the least of which is he can't watch any other team practice. So he's going to be calling games, but the amount of information he can get about the teams he's calling is wildly limited, because rightfully so, he's the owner of a team. So what keeps him from just texting his team everything there is to know about that team over there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what I would love to know, I would love to read a story on this. I mean, obviously, I'd love to write it if I had that ability, is how much is Tom Brady still talking to players and coaches in an informal setting during the week and or before the game? Because I do feel like he has enough of his experience that he's been able to bring that to the broadcast so far. But you do want to make sure that you have that kind of inside the building opportunity. And so there's 2 key ways he could get this. Either his broadcast partners and the rest of the broadcast team is able to get that and share that information with him, or he's able to say, like, hey, Jaden Daniels, who I talked to at the Rookie QB Summit, can we talk for a few minutes on the phone? Pretty much every quarterback, if not player and coach, is going to say, yes, I could talk to Tom Brady, particularly if he's willing to weigh in. And so I do think that Tom Brady is one of the few people positioned in a way that he can overcome it, even if it's not ideal. I think that it's still
but wait, Jori, is that not, or is there not a fine line for who's monitoring that conversation regarding tampering?
I don't know how much this is going to be enforced. Do you think it's enforced? I think there's a difference between him going in the building and people being willing to talk to him. And also you see him, he's still talking to all these people before the game on the field. And so I do think that Tom Brady probably has outlets to some of this information that nobody else has, and thus he is able to use those outlets.
But the first time a superstar player decides to go to the Raiders and it's somebody that was on a game that Brady called, are fans not going to immediately think, well, wait, you're not allowed to talk to players before the open window. You're not allowed to have any owner and player can't talk about anything. We really believe that owner and player he's not going to be like, hey, the Raiders I'd love to have you playing in Vegas. Like it just feels like it's opening the door to conspiracy theorists saying that he's doing more than just broadcasting a game.
Well, two things. One, he's not a controlling owner. And so it's not like he is the one who's ultimately executing this. This is still Mark Davis. He's got, 5% in the team. I also think he's already in business with Mark Davis through the Las Vegas Aces. How different is his relationship with Mark Davis now than before? I guess he has a financial stake in it. I think the other thing that unfortunately probably works well for your Raiders right now is that who's really being like, oh no, the Raiders did this. That's really a problem for the rest of us trying to win. Like, the Raiders are not a winning team right now. I think the most likely way that Tom Brady and the Raiders get penalized for what they're doing is that they do something that impacts the Eagles' ability to build their roster, because I have a fairly evidenced theory that Howie Roseman is by far the most likely one to go after anyone for tampering or otherwise. And so when he goes after people, they tend to get fined. Otherwise, not a lot of fines going on. And so I think that could we see a fine in the next 10 years? Maybe. Do I think that until the Raiders are truly competitive, anyone's going to be too concerned? Not really.
So this is the one thing, you're right, by the way, and that hurts my soul. I mean, you didn't have to be that savage on a Wednesday morning. Here's the one thing that I do think is interesting about Mark Davis. Marcel Reese is a former Raider that for several years was like a right-hand man to Mark Davis. When they came to Vegas, Marcel really had Mark Davis's ear on personnel, on people in the building. Everybody around the organization sort of knew that Marcel Reese was like the guy. Mark Davis likes to insulate himself with people that he can trust, that he feels like he can bounce ideas off of. Every time there's been a coaching hire that hasn't worked, Mark Davis has come in and been like, well, I talk to people. I talk to my sort of committee of people that help me make decisions. He looks for somebody to help him in this process constantly. And that is going to be Tom Brady. I think Tom Brady will have a wild amount of influence in everything Mark Davis does. Now, part of that, you could look at it and say, he's Tom Brady. Okay, well, John Elway ran the Broncos. He never found a quarterback, right? Like Michael Jordan ran an NBA team that never won, right? Great players don't necessarily make great front office executives. But with an owner that constantly wants somebody to help him decide what to do, and that's who Mark Davis is, I am curious how much a say, even though it's only 5%, I think Tom Brady immediately becomes a major presence in Mark Davis's life and in the locker room and everything that they're doing, which could be great. It could be a problem. At the end of the day, at some point, Mark Davis has to stand up and say, my team, my way. And even the way he joked about, well, Brady will help us to pick and train a quarterback. Everything's deflected. Everything's deferred. When does Mark Davis step up as an owner and say, my team, my way, this is how it goes? I don't think it ever happens. I think Brady becomes sort of the face of ownership for this team in many ways.
That's fascinating. I don't think he's going to replace Mark Davis as the face of ownership, but I do think that Mark will seek Brady's opinion, and I think Brady will be excited about giving it. I mean, again, a lot of these Super Bowl winning quarterbacks love the idea of being able to take what they learned from being on the field and put it into building a team. Troy Aikman was talking as recently as a podcast he was on last week about, hey, he really would have loved to be a general manager. He thinks that time kind of passed him by. He won 3 Super Bowls with the Cowboys, and he felt like one of the reasons he wanted to be a general manager is because he didn't just understand how the game was played, but also the interpersonal dynamic that's required to build a championship locker room and create that culture. And I think Tom Brady does have an element of that. Now, again, we've seen these coaches who worked for Bill Belichick go off and not have a lot of success. And so I think that similarly, if Tom Brady's not your quarterback, you can't really have Tom Brady's like MO running your organization. But I think that there is going to be an element of it. Now, I don't think that the Raiders are likely to have 2 to 3 more wins a year over the next 5 years because Tom Brady is in the ownership group, particularly in this very minority stake. Do you?
No, I don't. There's a lot that I like about what you just said. And there's a lot that I like about Tom Brady being a part of it. Here's what I don't like. I don't think that you can come in and teach an organization about culture of championships, help scout a quarterback, help train a quarterback, do any of those things, have a say in draft picks, all of these things that he might have, even a small voice. I don't think you can do that as a part-time job. And what scares me through all of this is that Tom Brady, the mogul, has a lot of jobs. Tom Brady has a lot of things he's invested in. If he treats ownership of the Raiders as a part-time job, that's fine. if Mark Davis gives that voice the same power that a full-time person has that's fully invested in everything the Raiders have, that becomes dangerous. Because I don't think you can scout a quarterback as your, that's my 10-hour-a-week job. I don't think you can sit there and change a culture behind the scenes when you're just popping in every once in a while. It's dangerous to give a full-time voice to a part-time employee, and I really need to see how Mark Davis and the Raiders balance that, because if they don't, somebody that is not putting in the same workload will have the power and impact that somebody that is. That becomes dangerous for a franchise.
Yeah, that is interesting. Again, it's not like the Raiders don't have their personnel department anymore. And there are a lot of people I know in that department who I think are really talented. Obviously, the results on the field have had mixed suggestions, but I do think that in terms of finding talent, they found some great talent. So it'll be interesting to see to what degree Tom Brady has that. Is he going to be sitting in draft meetings? Ownership typically does not sit in draft meetings. And also, it's easy for Mark Davis to say now that Tom Brady is going to help us pick a quarterback and all of that because you can sell it to the fans. But the same way I talk about the difference between owner Jerry Jones and general manager Jerry Jones, since he serves as both, I think that there is still a difference in that. As it relates to Tom's broadcasting career, by the way, I actually think what's going to most impact him, at least not most impact him, but I would say in addition to the impact of not being able to go into the buildings, he's also not allowed to criticize league or league officials in his position. And I think that's actually at least as damaging because think about the Monday night game when there's 22 penalties. Well, Brady, the broadcaster, is not allowed to call out the refs for that. And so not that we want to broadcast fully focused on the refs, but I think if anything, his ability to sort of give his honest and unfiltered take on the game is also really impacted. Now, granted, even though I do think Brady has done a great job as broadcasters, I love Greg Olson's broadcast so much. So if he decides to go more all in on the Raiders element and no longer broadcast, I'm happy for Greg Olson to get that spot back.
No, I think Greg Olson was better at it, and I think Tom Brady would be a better minority owner if he was committed fully to it. You mentioned Jerry Jones. Let's get to that because you know this team, you know this organization, you know this owner better than any. Jerry Jones is in the news largely, again, for his comments that were made on 105.3, the Fan, the flagship station. He didn't like the line of questioning. He went off on the on-air personalities that were questioning him. Your immediate reaction is somebody that knows this organization?
It was rather unexpected. I give Jerry Jones so much credit for how he tends to handle the media. There are a lot of team owners and general managers, much less the double, which is just him, who do not want to be available, who understand, hey, anything I say can be used against me. I've had conversations with general managers who later regretted being on the record. And I remember one telling me, look, I agree with everything I said. What you wrote was reflective of my beliefs, but I realize I am now speaking as the general manager of X team, and I can't speak on behalf of the team that way. Jerry really doesn't think about things in that terms because he wants that popularity. He wants that attention. And so I think what's interesting is that Jerry Jones' emotions on the radio, and I'm not saying he should have gone after the radio hosts and pretty much towed the lines of threatening their jobs and saying he could get someone else to ask these questions, which was also a little bit weird that he said all of that. And I know he told the Athletics' Diana Rossini later in the day that he doesn't need the people he's paying to ask the questions when he's not paying the radio guys. And also he's not writing the questions. I'm familiar with how that process works. I know the guys on that show. And I'm not saying they ask every tough question, but they do have the ability to ask the questions they want. And to Jerry's credit, he usually responds. I think, though, when you think of the emotions, when you think about sort of sometimes the contradicting things that Jerry Jones often says, a lot of these things are probably also said behind closed doors in other buildings. I think other teams don't believe that they should be airing that dirty laundry in public. And so Jerry Jones says, hey, well, if we air it in public and then the fans realize, well, no, I really do care about this and look how impassioned I am and I'm trying to do what I can. I think that's how he kind of justifies it. What I thought was actually most fascinating, a little bit overshadowed by what was going on with his emotions, was that Jerry Jones on this week's interview was still talking about how the Cowboys are all in. And it was hours, not even an hour before the Jets and the Bills are making trades for Pro Bowl receivers. And Jerry Jones is like, what do you want from me? I signed Dak Prescott to a top of market deal. I signed Amari Cooper to a top of market deal. I am all in. And I think that he should probably just, and then he also had this great line where he goes, I don't know where you think I'm going to find all these other players before our next game against San Francisco. Where are you finding other players? And I'm like, the Bills and Jets just found other players. So I think that's kind of what's interesting to me.
Well, I will say this. My first job in radio in Nashville was for 102.5, the game, ESPN Radio. We were the flagship station for the Nashville Predators. And it was very clear to us every single morning. I was the morning host, co-host. It was very, very clear to us that we had to talk about the Preds. That was part of our contract with the station. And the Preds listened. And I will never forget when one of the highest people in the organization called into the show one morning, and he insisted, whenever he called in, he got put on air. That was an insistence. He got put on air, and he ripped me and my co-host on air because he was in the car listening to our coverage and did not think that we were being positive enough about the team after a win. They had won. They hadn't played well. We were being critical. He didn't appreciate that with his kids in the car. He didn't appreciate our tone. He told us live on air. And I'll never forget when we finished that show, our programming director was sitting out the hall. We got lectured. And we got hey, we got to remember that we're all in business together, and this is all one big family, and we got to make sure that we're keeping everything as real as possible, but we also don't want to make the team mad. All of these things. This is real for so many flagship stations. If you are listening to a station that is a flagship, that's a negotiated contract. That's a huge part of how they do business. Jori being so transparent to it, but also radio hosts feel this all the time. And I get asked all the time by people why I've never worked for the Raiders. And I'll tell you, like flat out, honestly, I have said things on shows that have made the team irritated. I've gotten the team lecturing me at times saying, hey, we love your work, but feels like you were really. And look, the great thing about not getting paid by the Raiders is if they don't like me, then I don't have to worry about it. And if they don't want me to come on their shows, then I can say, fine, I won't do it. But that's important to me. I don't know that everybody doing every job has the opportunity to stand up to whatever their team is and say, hey, I'm going to do my job the way I want to do it. So I'm glad that this has created an uproar to protect the hosts that are simply doing their job. I wish as a society we asked for more real coverage from the team's affiliated radio outlets, because so often the teams don't want it to be hard. The fans don't want it to be hard. Like everybody wants us to be soft on all of this. In my experience, that's lesser. That presumes everybody listening to it is too stupid to know what's going on. So shame on Jori for going off to that level to the hosts. Good on the hosts for being protected at this point. But man, this just speaks to one of the wild things about the Cowboys. It's never just about football. It's never just about practice. It's never just about the team. It's always about the circus around it. You've covered the circus. And when we talk about distractions, you cannot tell me that at some level, being a Dallas Cowboy isn't a more distracted existence in the NFL than playing for other teams.
Yeah, I think you make so many great points. And as I texted my editor, Joey Galino, last night, I could give you guys a lot of dissertations on media literacy in today's world and the increasingly blurred line between reporters and sort of PR people that drives me crazy, because I think fans tend to get mad of like, why are either I think the same fans are telling reporters, you're not asking tough enough questions and you're way too hard on the team. Like they get mad about all of that. And the players too are so used to all of these people asking them questions that are only one line of reasoning and only trying to understand a certain set of facts, honestly, that I think that it creates a lot of issues. What I will say is interesting, though, when you talk about the distractions, I do believe, and I've said on the record many times, that the Cowboys have a ton of distractions and that many decisions are made. Look, I think it's unfair to people. I think people who say that Jerry Jones doesn't care about winning, I think that's unfair. I think he also cares about making money, and I think he makes decisions that he hopes can do both and probably has this optimism that one doesn't conflict with the other. But he does care about winning, and I think that that is a little bit of an unfair statement of people being like, Jerry's fine being mediocre and not trying to do anything. I think that those splash trades, especially during March in free agency, often don't have the effects. All of that said, despite the distractions that the Cowboys have, if you think about yesterday, had Jori not had that interview, we would have been saying, well, why isn't Dak making those throws? Why isn't CD doing this? Why isn't the defense figuring out what's wrong with Mike Zimmer? And yes, everyone is still aware of all of the issues that led to the 47-9 loss to the Lions, their third straight lopsided loss at home. And even without Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, this was not a close game they lost. This was an absolute blowout and the worst home loss since before the Cowboys drafted Troy Aikman. I mean, we're talking back to the 80s. All of that said, in some ways, yesterday was one of the few times where I thought that what Jori did, rather than distract, actually kind of took some of the burden off of his players and off of his coach, because people were no longer saying on Tuesday, hey, why is Mike McCarthy doing this? Hey, why are the players? They were like, Jerry's crazy and he's not giving them what it takes to succeed. And so it's kind of one of those things when, as I was like writing late into the night, my column, I realized, hey, maybe Jori kind of like took the punching bag for one of these times and actually like he was the one who's the story and gave everyone else a day to breathe. Do you think that?
I'd never thought of it until you just said it, and it's brilliant. Now that you've said it, like, and we can question a lot about Jerry Jones. He's a very smart individual. That is a brilliant. I never would have thought of it that way. Jori, you have blown my mind. Now that I see it that way, I won't be able to unsee it. That's absolutely brilliant. And you did say something there that made me laugh. The way that fans talk about the questions asked. As most fans know, I predicted this year the Raiders would win 7 or 8 games, right? When I made those predictions in post-draft, I got destroyed. Every time I go on the Raiders radio station, every time I do any hit, every time I post on social media, Raiders fans would just absolutely destroy me. I'm an idiot. I'm a moron. I don't know what I'm talking about. This team's going to win 10 games. I think they're going to win 7. I suck. Then all of a sudden, the Raiders are exactly what I thought they were going to be, a bad team that's sort of up and down. And now I'm not freaking out about it because they're sort of the bad team that I thought they were going to be. And people are like, oh, you suck, man. You're not even like, why aren't you asking these questions? Why aren't you talking about this? And it's like, because they are what I thought they were going to be. So I'm not that overreactive about it. Like, fans want you to support whatever fans actually feel in that moment. And if you don't feel the same exact thing that they feel, it's obvious you suck and don't know anything about football. It's a wild world. Okay, you mentioned the Lions. We got to get to it. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we will figure out what the Lions should do, because even in a win, Lions fans walked out of that game feeling awful because of a just terrible injury. We'll break down what to do about Aidan Hutchinson next. Jori, usually when your team wins a blowout game, you can just sort of smile and say, hey, life is good. That was not the case for the Lions. We all saw, or hopefully didn't see, what was an absolutely gruesome injury for Aidan Hutchinson, one of the best players in the league, one of the nicest guys. He's given time to Yahoo Sports many times. I've talked to him a couple of times for us. He's a very, very kind person in our interactions with him that has gone through an absolutely crushing injury. First and foremost, I don't think we have to say this, but I will say this. It's all about the recovery. It's all about the human being. Football doesn't matter. I want Aidan Hutchinson to get back to being 100% of Aidan Hutchinson, and we'll see how that happens. This is a absolute, just a blow to the team that takes all of the oxygen out of them. They've got to figure out how to win without him. Frank and I talking Sunday night. He mentioned the fact that he's not sure this team can win a Super Bowl without Aidan Hutchinson. Aidan means that much to this defense, means that much to how they disguise their secondary, all of these things. He dropped, the Lions were dropped a little in Frank's power rankings. But it becomes interesting because what I can't figure out is what the Lions should do.
Which was worse for the Lions this week, being dropped in Frank's power rankings or losing Aidan Hutchinson?
On power rankings, obviously. I mean, that Lions fans are real worried. I know. But my phone blew up. The minute the injury happened, my phone blew up from everybody I've ever met. That's like, oh, Maxx Crosby is going to be a Detroit Lion. And Max has come out very clearly and said he has no interest in being traded. I believe strongly that there is no offer. I can say with confidence, there is absolutely no offer that the Las Vegas Raiders would get that would cause them to trade Maxx Crosby. It will not happen. So I don't think that there's any. I think you could offer 10 years of first-round draft picks to Mark Davis at this point, and he would say no. Love it or hate it, Maxx Crosby's not going anywhere. So I say that. But if you're the Lions, you got to make that phone call, right? You got to call and at least ask about Maxx Crosby. It seems like it'd be stupid not to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Lions should make the phone call. They probably already have made the phone call. And I think that's something you realize when you're around teams is my favorite reports are always the, hey, so-and-so's checking in on the trade offer. Well, yeah, every team should be checking in on every trade offer, at the very least for their notes, even if they're not going to be able to get it. Because let's say you don't need a pass rusher now, but you need one in 2 years, and you're trying to track how initially the Raiders wanted a second for Davante and said, we have to get a second. But then it turned out they were able to get a third with only a second if he gets this all-pro or AFC championship ability. Well, that's something you need to understand when you're making decisions in 2 years from now on how you're going to trade. And so I think that for sure teams should be checking in on Maxx Crosby. I agree with you that it doesn't seem like he's going to be traded, but I think our colleague Charles Robinson made a great point this week when he said, hey, last year when they were trying to figure out what direction the Raiders should go, particularly at head coach and general manager, Mark Davis went to 3 players to try and weigh in: Maxx Crosby, Davante Adams, and Josh Jacobs. Davante Adams is now with the Jets and Josh Jacobs is now with the Packers. And so I think that we have seen other really key anchors of that franchise be traded. I don't expect that to be the case with Maxx Crosby, but I think that we shouldn't be sure it's not going to happen given the franchise's track record on this. I think when you talk about the Lions, yeah, they should absolutely trade for a pass rusher because here's the deal. you said you questioned the Jets trading for Davante Adams because they're trading for a guy after they lost a game when they are a little bit out of reach of what they actually want to do in the playoffs. The Lions are well within reach, and they have shown that repeatedly week to week this year. I mean, it's interesting seeing how physical they were against the Cowboys and how different the levels of physicality were from those two teams. Because when I went to the Lions training camp this year, I went to 2 practices and I was like, oh my gosh, those practices were insane. And I know that sounds dramatic, but I visited 17 teams this summer, 14 during training camp alone. And the Lions practice was unlike any other team I visited. The level of physicality, yes, they were doing a mock game, but I've been at so many teams where I'm like, even if the pads are on, there's just not much physicality. And I understand the argument for that too. But Dan Campbell ran that practice like the former player that he is. And I think that we see that. In terms of getting a pass rusher, if I'm them, I'm calling the Jets and saying, clearly Haason Reddick is not coming to your building, because if he was going to, he would have done that a long time ago. So how can we make something work? And also, you just gave up some draft capital to get Davante Adams. So don't you want some draft capital back? And I mean, that's the trade that I'm making if I'm the Lions.
Yeah, Haason Reddick makes the most sense because you could just call and be like, all right, you're giving up a third. We'll give you our third. There we go.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't feel like if you're a Jets fan, you're frustrated that he never saw the field, but he's not going to see the field anyway. So the Haason Reddick move makes a lot of sense. I also, again, if you're Maxx Crosby, I will say this. Maxx is the face of the Raiders, and he's the best player this team has seen in a generation. I don't think Mark Davis can take the only guy that's a face and just remove him from the team, especially not knowing if they're going to be able to draft a quarterback. So I don't think he goes anywhere. But if we're going to apply the argument that the team sucks, they're not accomplishing their goals, maybe it's time to move on and let a great player go somewhere else and win. Couldn't we apply that same argument to everything about Myles Garrett? Like, the Browns are not going anywhere right now. The Browns quarterback play makes them an abject disaster. They just traded Amari Cooper, so they're telling you that they're in a little bit of a sell-off mode. Why not? If you're Myles Garrett, everything we can say about Maxx Crosby and why he deserves to play somewhere else also applies to Myles Garrett. Why not go out and move for Myles?
Yeah, and I actually think there's a stronger case against trading for Maxx Crosby, and here's what it is. When you look at the Carolina Panthers benching Bryce Young, and we were all questioning the decision at the time, but now I think we understand it a little more. I talked to people within that organization who said, look, yes, you don't want to ruin the quarterback going forward. Yes, you don't want to wreck his confidence, but when you're a first-year head coach, you need to get some wins because your culture as the head coach is depending on it. Your buy-in from the rest of the locker room is depending on it. This locker room doesn't care where the team is in 3 years. They care what they can do now and that they can win. And I think similarly, we saw that with Gerard Mayo and the Patriots switching to Drake May. And I was critical of that decision because I felt like the offensive line was not capable of supporting him. But there was this idea of that, yes, Gerard has been around the Patriots a lot longer than Dave Canales has been around the Panthers, but still, as a first-year head coach, you have to get that buy-in. Kevin Stefanski is the reigning head coach of the year. I'm not saying he's going to get it this year. I think we can all agree he's pretty much not going to get it this year, but I voted for him last year, and he deserved that because of how he won in spite of his quarterback rather than because of his quarterback and the game plans he was able to put together and everything like that. And so I think that he actually has a little more clout in that organization than we see Antonio Pierce already having with the Raiders from a head coaching standpoint, particularly. Not that he's not a respectable guy and a respectable coach, but he has not yet established his culture, and you need to establish that culture by getting some wins, and Maxx Crosby is really the heart and soul of that. I don't think the Browns are going to trade Myles Garrett, though, because they still have so much talent, and they were still in the playoffs last year. This is not a team that for like 5 to 10 years has not been competitive. This is a team that really figure out the quarterback situation, and I would still think really highly of them. I mean, I can't remember if it was you or Frank or whatever, but there are so many people who thought the Browns were true Super Bowl contenders this year if Deshaun Watson could do even just average level quarterback play. And so I think that when you see that the problem with the Browns right now seems so obvious and so clearly one player in one position, albeit the most important position relative to winning a game, I think that's why you won't trade away Myles Garrett.
I agree with a lot of that. I think it'd be a death blow to your fans too. And I do think owners consider that sometimes. It's interesting to me though. You look at Maxx, you look at Myles. I'll add Josh Hines-Allen to this conversation. 3 of your best pass rushers in the AFC are on terrible football teams. And it's funny because, look, I'm not an idiot, contrary to popular belief. You have to pay great players when you have absolutely epic players. But what do you do when those epic players don't actually result in wins? And it's one of the weirdest things about the NFL right now is that you could make an argument that Myles Garrett and Maxx Crosby are going to be Defensive Player of the Year candidates every single year. And it does not matter in the wins-loss column. So, like, what do you do as a team when you've got this epic superstar that's going to play at the highest possible level every single year and is the life and blood of your team, but your team sucks anyway. Like, I don't know how you're supposed to handle that.
I actually disagree with you that it doesn't matter in the wins and loss columns. I think that it's not going to get you to the playoffs single-handedly, but I think it will get you a couple more wins a year. And that can matter if you can get the rest of the team moving in the right direction.
That's fair. That's fair. Maybe I'm equating too much to what, where winning comes from. It's just interesting because, like, look, if I'm the Jags, I suck. I'm taking phone calls on Josh Hines-Allen. Why not? If I'm the Bengals defense, it's already terrible. Am I taking phone calls on Hendrickson? Like, is everything on the table? Like, all of these pass rushers feel like they are untradeable because they are really good and getting sacks is everything. But the amount of teams that just have huge defensive issues or huge team issues, even though they have a defensive superstar, it's just stunning to me.
But think about it. Are you going to trade away your quarter? If you're the Chargers, for example, and you don't feel like you're super competitive, like even think back before this year, are you going to trade away Justin Herbert because you're not competitive this year? No, because it's so hard to find a quarterback. Well, most people in the league will tell you the two most important anchors to build a franchise and to be able to get competitive are your quarterback and your pass rusher. And so if you have one of those guys, you can't let them out of their building. And that's one of the few positions. Like, I think when you trade away a receiver, yes, it hurts your team, but it is easier to find another high-level receiver than it is to find a pass rusher at the level of the guys that you are talking about.
Yeah, just look at college football any given Saturday, where now we're seeing a 17-year-old absolutely tear up the sport. So it is wild. Okay, we'll see what happens for them moving forward. Thursday Night Football, real quick. We've got Denver at New Orleans. Denver's favored by 2.5. Frank not here, but he has taken the Broncos with the points. So he thinks the Broncos win by more than 2.5. Calls it the Sean Payton revenge game. Frank has gotten 5 of these right. Jori, you and I are finally on a roll. You have 3, I have 2. So Broncos, 2.5 point favorites at New Orleans. Who do you think wins?
Ooh, that is such a tough one because it's the Sean Payton revenge game. I just need to take offense with that because Sean Payton screwed the Saints. The Saints didn't screw Sean Payton. He left. He retired and was like, I don't want to coach for you guys, so I'm going to make you trade me to the Broncos. Like, no, I think that the Saints should try and get revenge on Sean Payton. That said, a lot of the guys who would want that revenge are no longer in the building, so I think that that's going to be difficult. I do regrettably think that the Broncos are going to pull this one out, but like, I kind of want Spencer Rattler to just go off and like show the Saints, the fans, that like, hey, we can stand up to Sean Payton even though he left us.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. The problem here is that the Broncos defense is great. And I know I've been tough on the Broncos overall as a team. I don't think they're a great team. But the Broncos defense is great. They're going to put Spencer Rattler in a blender. I just don't think this is a good game or a good matchup for a young quarterback to come in and suddenly try and figure out a defense that really disguises itself well.
Yeah.
I'm with you. We all agree that Denver's going to win this game by, more than 2.5 points. So we won't catch up any ground, but we'll get more in the standings, and that'll feel good. It always feels good to work with Stone. Oh, go ahead, Jori.
No, I will say a week after seeing that Spencer Rattler Baker Mayfield game, I do hope that we get just like a completely unhinged game from Spencer Rattler and Bo Nix, 2 rookie quarterbacks starting. Neither of them are the top 5 quarterbacks drafted, and yet they're both going to be starting this game. So I hope we get a similarly insane game with lots of touchdowns and lots of interceptions, because just good for the sport.
No, I want to see Spencer go off and Bo struggle. So then we start did the Broncos take the wrong quarterback conversation?
Oh, yeah.
Inject it in my veins. Give me all the chaos. Give me all the drama. Stone is our producer behind the scenes. He does God's work. Make sure that you send him a thanks. Make sure you
we need Stone to pick the game for Thursday.
Oh, yeah, Stone.
Remember, we're doing that now?
Oh, yeah. I forgot. Stone got last week's game wrong because he picked Seattle. So Stone has 0. Stone, do you have a pick for us? Stone, you cannot hear Stone's voice, which is really unfortunate because it is sensual.
It's like the Wizard of Oz.
He has taken the Saints because he wants to be a counterculture. He wants to go against us. So Stone could get on the board at this point, which means he'd only be 1 behind me, and he's only picked in 2 games. Okay, it's fine. It's fine. Follow us on Twitter at Jori Epstein, at Jason Fitz. You guys know where to follow us. We'll be back Friday with C. Rob and Frank. We will continue this fun. We appreciate you guys listening. Again, rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, your family, tell your enemies, tell everybody to hang out with us. Thanks for listening to the show.